I'm Josh. I'm the mechanic.
And I'm Kiley. I'm the monk. And welcome to the Monk and the Mechanic. So we have on our show today a special guest, William Pullin, who's a UFO historian. Welcome.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Super
Thanks for having me.
excited. I'm a amateur UFO enthusiast. I am really happy you're the only second guest on our show. So I'm not even going to try to introduce you. Would you like to tell us more about what it means being a UFO historian, how you got into it? Just as long as you want to, tell us about yourself.
Sure. I'm born and raised here in San Antonio. I was kind of, in a roundabout way, aware of the UFO issue through sci-fi TV shows and movies and magazines, and you hear about it on specials. Didn't take it seriously until my sophomore year in college, and at UTSA up the road. Kind of spent the entire summer devouring all the information I could, books, pamphlets, magazines, handouts, and just came to the conclusion that there's something to it. No one has any answers. But you have highly qualified individuals like military pilots, military personnel, scientists, seeing these things. If they can't identify them, then that usually means, I guess you can go along with the idea that a regular lay person may not be able to either, because they're not as qualified to see and identify what's in the air. And then beyond that, you have individuals experiencing things on a personal basis, whether they're being abducted or sighting a UFO, and it's troubling, it's emotionally traumatic, and that needs to be addressed. People are undergoing traumatic experiences, and really most of these people just want an answer. They really don't want to investigate it. They just want to know that they're not crazy. They're seeing things that are bizarre, so after that summer, I kind of realized there's something to this, and been examining the issue since then. That's been since 1989, and have no answers to it at all. It's a total enigma. So I guess a UFO historian is definitely not a UFO expert, because an expert in my mind means you have some answers, and there's no such thing as a UFO expert. You can't have answers to an enigma. A UFO historian is aware of the data, aware of what's being reported, but has not been able to definitively find any answers. That's where I'm at. That's where everyone is at, really. So I'm people call me a debunker. I'm not. I'm just a skeptic. I just look at a case, look at the data, what's being reported, and I'm cautious and say, okay, I'll examine this first before I decide what it may or may not be, which is different than a debunker. A debunker is somebody who just has their mind made up anti-UFO, and then no matter what the evidence is, they've had their mind made up that there's nothing to this. So there's a lot of that going on. But I've gotten into lecturing now here in San Antonio and some other places, broadcasting myself and my group on Facebook, writing and doing that sort of thing. So it's a very encompassing focus I have on the UFO issue. But in living here in San Antonio, there's been quite a few UFO cases of note reported in this area. Texas is kind of an active place. California, Colorado, South America. There's certain areas of the country and the world that are more active in UFO lore than other places. So it's a good place to be. There's a lot of military bases in town, which is a definite connection to the phenomenon. Some of the strongest cases are military UFO interactions, so that's a big deal. I look at it from a nuts and bolts standpoint because I'm not an experiencer. I've never seen UFO, so I don't have that perspective. So I take sighting cases from an experiencer with an open mind because I don't have a point of view. I didn't see one, so I would never judge anybody anyway. But having never seen one, I don't have that perspective.
Right.
So I take it at face value, objectively, chronicle it, and then attempt to find some other evidence to corroborate the evidence, and go from there. If I've ever seen a UFO, I'm sure my approach would change a little bit because then it would become more personal to me, having experienced it myself. But at this point, I'm just kind of, I stand far away, collect the data, and kind of make a determination as to what happened and what went on. So.
Have you ever tried to track down anything physically? Like I know there are times when there's an increase in sightings in a certain area, and people will flock to that area to try to see what might be going on. Have you ever been part of that or done anything like that?
I was a field investigator, independent, until about 8 years ago.
Okay.
And life happens, so you can't really go leaving town all of a sudden on a whim and go. But so I conducted about 30 field investigations, and most were mundane. Most were misidentified aircraft or a helicopter or a meteor strike or whatever. The last case I investigated was a case in Menard, Texas, which is just north of Junction.
Yep.
And that remains unidentified. We had multiple witnesses, and there was some environmental changes. There were some burn marks on the ground. There weren't any landing traces, but something that had interacted with the environment that couldn't be explained. There was no aircraft traffic, no military apparatus in operation. And the 8 witnesses that saw the anomaly, or the whatever, they called it a craft, but we'll call it UFO. The 8 individuals, none of them knew each other. And they were within they were far enough apart. It was about a 20-mile radius from one person to the other. So that's a pretty good case. You have different geographical locations. So
where exactly in Menard? I'm somewhat familiar with that. I used to go through there quite a bit as an independent appraiser.
It was seen right off the state highway, the one running north from Junction to Menard to that other small little town.
Yeah, I think it's Brady or something like that. Yeah.
So about half the witnesses were literally west of that highway. The other half were east of it, so it was centrally located.
Wow.
But most of the stronger sightings were within 200 yards of the freeway.
Wow.
And the physical evidence was gathered about 100 yards away. So it was all pretty centrally located, but it was, I guess you could say, it's somewhat south of town. It's a tiny little place.
Okay.
But 8 years down the road, I've gone there since then, and it's grown since then.
Yeah. Wow.
So that was the interesting case, and that's kind of typical of UFO sightings. It's hard to pin down an explanation.
Right.
But after examination, if you have multiple chains of evidence, if it remains unexplained, that's certainly thought-provoking. Makes you think, but what was that? Interesting.
So I'm interested, William, when you went down there to investigate the Menard, were people anxious to talk to you, or were they shy, or what was it like?
I kind of got both sides of the story. I mean, there were some people that kind of were like, "You're looking into a UFO case. What's up with you?" They didn't belittle me. They clearly weren't crazy about me poking around town. I wasn't poking around town, just walking around. And I had gotten contact information from these people, so I knew where they lived, and I visited them at their house. I wasn't really meandering around town with a silver hat on, just saying, "Okay, I'm looking for a UFO." And it wasn't like it was very professionally done, very discreet. But they were all open to talking with me. They reached out to me. So they were ready to communicate what happened. And again, they really didn't want an answer. They just wanted to know they weren't crazy, which I get a lot. There are a few people that see UFO and they want to know a definitive answer. They want to know, was that an alien spacecraft? Was it military apparatus? What was that? They want to know. But I think the majority of people that reach out to me, at least here in San Antonio, in Texas, tend to just want someone who's professional just to look into it. Just to confirm that, okay, I wasn't crazy. I saw something unidentified. That's enough for me. That's enough. This person has credentials. They looked into it. It remains unidentified. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't seeing things. I don't need to see a therapist. I'm good to go. I saw something legitimate. That's enough. And that was the case in Menard. Virtually everybody just wanted me to look into it. And when it remained unidentified, I got back with everybody, and they kind of thought, okay, that's kind of what we thought would happen.
Maybe even looking at, say, well, no, actually, this turned out to be something explainable.
Yeah.
I mean, either way.
Yeah.
You want to know.
Right. Yeah. You find out if something explainable or not. Because I would say, speaking with people after being in military aviation, there's a lot of things that people think, oh, I don't know what this is. And I go, well, it's this, I mean, I'm sure that's a lot of the cases, but I've never experienced anything either, although I am, I do believe that there is so much that is not explained, that can't be explained, that you can even say, oh, the government has some secret thing. Yeah, but some of those things are so far beyond anything I can think of that we would have. It just doesn't make any sense. It doesn't. And, looking at this a little bit before we came in here, a lot of people say, or has been said, that Roswell is the beginning, but there's paintings, there's pictures, there's, that go all the way back through history. Even Christopher Columbus in his private log wrote about seeing, UFOs coming out of the water.
Yeah.
So I wanted to say quickly before we get too far ahead is that, so I think it's interesting that some people think that you're a debunker.
Yes, that happens a lot.
So, but you actually have come to the conclusion that there's something. It's unidentifiable,
Yep.
but there's something, right?
There's something to it. I mean, the vast majority of cases that are reported are explainable.
Yeah.
95%. But that 5 to 10% remains unidentified even after investigation. That's fascinating to me.
Yeah.
And it's kind of counterintuitive when it comes to investigations, whether it's a police investigation or archaeological expedition or whatever. Usually you would think the more evidence you have, the more easily you can explain a case.
Mm-hmm.
That is logical. In the UFO field, it works reverse. The cases that remain unidentified are the ones with the most evidence, the most chains of evidence, radar, visual, physical evidence, environmental changes, multiple witnesses in different locations. They don't know each other, photos, videos, radar tracings. Those cases remain unidentified. And you would think the reverse would hold true, but it's not. So that's very interesting that even despite a good amount of evidence with some cases, and there's very few of those, but the ones that do exist, you still can't identify what they saw, which really, to me, speaks volumes about what.
Do you think it's because they're continuing to look into it further? Like if you were to deal with a UFO case and you say, oh well, that's flares, and then you prove that the military was there shooting flares, that's it. They don't really look into it any further because it's already been explained. But if you have something that you can't explain, you dig deeper. You keep digging until you try to find the answer, and you have all of this evidence that leads you nowhere.
Yeah, you try to find as much data as you can.
Yeah.
The hard part about UFO investigations is that most sightings are reported far after the fact, weeks or months or years after the the event took place.
Yeah.
So physical evidence disappears. Environmental changes are lost because Mother Nature does her thing with the seasons. So that's an issue. Another issue is that most sightings don't get reported. We have no idea what percentage it is, but most researchers feel that it's over 70% of cases don't get reported at all. Mm-hmm. People just kind of quietly go about their business and go from there.
Have you seen a change in people, their acceptance between when you first got into this and this now, or does it seem to be just about as sort of looked at as a strange thing?
I think it's getting more and more acceptance slowly.
Yeah.
So that's one thing that, you embody something that I feel is interesting, because you think very logically about it, but at the same time you have enough interest to pursue it. Whereas I see extremes, even within my own home, there's two extremes, right? So like I want to believe. So when I watch a video or I read something, I want to believe it, right? Where my wife, she, and maybe this is the deeper question, is why do so many people, even though how many every day somewhere in the world somebody is saying that they see something unexplainable in the sky, right?
Yep.
Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of reports all the time, right? But I don't know if it's disinformation or people were made fun of or what happened, but some people, even my wife, if I show her a video, she's like, well, that's blurry. I really can't see anything. It could be anything. Or, you could read something and they're like, yeah, well, that was written after the fact. Did that person really read it? Or did that person really write it? Or was it changed or whatever? So it's almost like she's looking for a reason not to believe, and I'm looking for a reason to believe.
Yeah.
But you talked about the critical thinking being the same thing in like archaeology or something, right? So let's pretend like somebody, every once in a while they find this big bone and they're trying to say that these huge creatures lived here before, and somebody's like, oh, you're crazy, put on your tinfoil hat. This guy thinks these large creatures lived on this,
Right.
And you're like, no, but we do find bones, and we do, there's fossils and stuff, but they've been made fun of until the evidence, there's a tipping point, till it's undeniable that huge creatures used to live on this planet.
Yep.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So what do you think is the cause for that the extreme being so far apart. You got people that 100% they believe, and then 100% they won't believe no matter if they saw one themselves. Is it because all these years they made fun of people, or?
I think that's part of it. The ridicule factor has always been a big deal. It's always been troubling that people can't come forward because they're afraid of being made fun of. Nobody wants to deal with that kind of scenario. Beyond that, I have no explanation as to why people are so polarized. I mean, what you mentioned, how your wife processes the UFO issue. Mm. I might say the same things. I might say, that photo is kind of blurry. I can't really do much with that. But my next question would be, but let's search for more information about that sighting and go from there. Maybe do something with it. It's not just cast it aside and just throw it away. Mm-hmm. It's, okay, something might be there. It pays dividends to keep looking, keep digging. Something might be there. If there's documentation there, well, that document doesn't quite hold up under scrutiny, but there might be a chain of evidence to get us somewhere where it does. Let's keep looking. We can't just validate our own belief structure and then just stop. Mm-hmm. We need to keep looking. What's the old adage? You stop growing and learning if you stop looking. You gotta keep looking. Mm-hmm. As long as you're alive, you gotta keep looking. You gotta keep learning and processing information. And when somebody is anti-UFO or a debunker or just doesn't believe in the possibility of alien interaction, they tend to have their position and don't look. Yeah. They've made up their mind. They're not going to look. Somebody in the middle, like myself, is skeptical and is cautious, but is always going to look and always going to look and always going to look and dig. Somebody who believes 100% into UFOs is always going to believe everything. And both of these extremes on either side are not too healthy. It has to be somewhere in the middle where you don't believe everything, but you're aware that something's going on. Let's dig, let's look, and that's more of a healthy look at the subject. You can extend that into religion and politics. A very polarized look doesn't get you anywhere. An all-encompassing examination is more productive, where you take all points of view. You have a point of view, you have a point of view. All our points of view are built up as our life experiences come forward. The more experience we have as an individual kind of melds ourselves into the adults we are now. So we all have different points of view and different ideas about what may or may not be happening. None of us is right and none of us is wrong. We just have our opinions. Let's come together and work together and come to some consensus about what's going on. So as to why it's so polarized, I don't know. It's very troubling that people have made their mind up about this. I recall I had a conversation years ago at the San Antonio Public Library. In fact, a young woman walked up to me. I was reading a UFO book, writing a report. She said, "Oh, you believe in UFOs?" I said, "Yeah, I believe in the phenomenon." And she said, "Have you ever seen one?" I said, "No, I've never seen a UFO. No, ma'am." And she said, "Well, how can you believe in something you've never seen?"
Yeah.
And I told her, I said, "Well, do you believe in heat?" She said, "Well, yes. I see a fire." I go, "No, that's a fire."
Right.
"Do you believe in heat?" She goes, "Well, yes." I go, "Have you ever seen heat?" She said, "Well, no." I said, "But you believe in something you've never seen."
Right.
"Well, yeah, that's true." I go, "Well, then same thing with UFOs. You don't have to have actually seen something with your own eyes to believe it exists."
Yeah.
But somehow with some aspects of the paranormal, whether it's Bigfoot, ghosts, and certainly UFOs, people just don't believe what they have not seen. Instead of taking the time to, let's examine the data. We have thousands of reports every year over the past few decades. Let's examine that. Well, something's going on. Even though I haven't seen it, you have some qualified individuals that have. That's pretty thought-provoking. I mean, but people just don't want to. They want to look. They want to dig. They want to do their homework. They're comfortable in their white picket fence, 2.5 kids, and they have a belief structure, and they're not open-minded enough to at least embrace the possibilities of what may be going on. So
when you say that you're a UFO historian, Josh had mentioned cave paintings and like George Washington's, and things that way back there. Is that the kind of thing that you do as far as, is it just you're researching present day, or you've gone all the way back as far as you can in history looking into this phenomenon?
I've made myself aware of what's been reported over the past centuries. But to really get a grasp of the data and have an idea of something happened or something didn't happen, once you get to past the 1930s, 1920s, it's difficult to really wrap your head around a case. no physical evidence. The witnesses are have passed away. You're relying on the integrity of journalists at the time, newspaper clippings. It's very hard to really wrap your head around it. But it seems to me that humans have been seeing things in the sky they couldn't identify for a while, several thousand years. Now, certainly some of those are atmospheric anomalies. Certainly some of those are astronomical, stars, meteors, comets, things like that they couldn't explain. They weren't aware of because their knowledge of science was limited.
Right.
But is it possible they saw other things that were more anomalous than that? Certainly. We can't prove that. But it's a logical assumption that they saw things they could explain. And back then, they may have been more aware of it because now we just keep looking at our cell phones. Whoever walks around looking down, no one looks up.
That's what I was going to say. Not only that, but with light pollution, if you went to go stand outside and you'd say, well, where's Sagittarius? You look up and go, I don't know. I can see two bright stars that are probably planets. And that's about all you can see in the city. Back then, you didn't have that problem. They were very, well, not always, but, for the large part, they were very aware of their sky and what was going on. They still wouldn't maybe recognize a comet as clearly because, we can get on the internet and find out about comets going by, but, it's just standard. I feel like they were probably actually more valuable witnesses because they were so aware of what was in their sky every night, where now it's very hard for us to tell, and not only that, but no airplanes, no helicopters, no blimps, no nothing. There was nothing man-made in the sky at the time. Whereas now, there's all kinds of stuff in the in the sky. Other than 9/11, it's been full of aircraft.
Yes.
Every night, all night long, you see stuff, and satellites you can see screaming across the sky. None of that at the time.
Yeah, I found it was interesting one time that in all these historic sites, like, ancient sites, they had these concrete or dug out places for water. Like you would think there's fountains or gardens or something, but there was always this like troughs of water. And they said that they would actually use it to look up. They would look at the surface of the water so that they could look up.
Wow.
It was like a mirror. And it makes you wonder, what were they looking at?
Yeah.
Maybe it was just pretty to see the reflection of the night sky, or were they watching something? Who knows?
Yeah.
From a scientific standpoint, we become more aware of our universe through our technology. We're able to see faraway stars, galaxies, neutrons, what have you. But on a personal, humanistic standpoint, we become far less aware of our surroundings, our environment, because of our technology. We're always looking at our cell phones. We're looking forward. We're driving. We're making dinner. We're indoors. We're not actively outside looking up. We're not actively aware of our surroundings, our environment, as much as we were, say, 1,000 years ago, even 500 years ago. So that has certainly made us less aware of what may be going on. And like you mentioned, people's back in the day, we're talking thousands of years, may have been much more keen observers about their surroundings of the sky, much more, because again, you had no human technology up there.
Right.
So everything was natural.
Yeah.
And so if you were able to discern identifiable phenomenon from things that they saw that were truly anomalous, that would go a long way. But now we have our skies are cluttered with stuff. It's so hard to pick out anything that's actually unidentifiable, actually anomalous, from things that are just misidentified, like drones and aircraft. So very troubling.
Yeah, and I'll admit a silliness, but I was out walking my dogs and I saw this thing flying around, and I was like, oh, what is that? And it took me, 10, 15 minutes to figure out there's somebody's drone. They're flying around. I mean, I didn't think it was a UFO, but at the same time, you're like, what is that? What is that? And it takes you a few minutes to identify what it is. And I know what drones are. I know what airplanes are. I know what helicopters are. But it just takes you a few minutes, especially when it exhibits like strange behavior. Like, oh, that's an airplane. Oh no, that's not an airplane. Well, you start to watch it, and then at night with lights, your eyesight is not as good as it is during the daytime, and you extrapolate information and you say, oh crap, what is that? And then you go, oh, that's a drone. And so if you only got a glimpse of that for a second, I'm sure that would skew your thoughts on, maybe you saw something, maybe it is explainable, maybe it's maybe it's not. But I find personally more credible in pilots' reports and astronauts' reports that recent. Well, I guess it's not a recent video, but it's a recent released video of the Navy pilots with their FLIR.
Yeah.
And I'm very aware of how FLIR works. I was a mechanic on F-18s. Used to, play with the FLIR and look at all of its different things that you could do with it. And here you have a naval aviator, 2 of them actually, but one of them with the FLIR footage, and it's very clearly FLIR footage, and it's very clearly not doing normal aircraft things. They don't know what it is, which they see things all the time. Those to me seem to hold a lot more weight than even myself looking up into the sky and seeing a strange light I don't understand.
Yeah. So yeah, exactly. Along with those, there's a big difference between seeing a blinking light and like not knowing what that is, compared to having actual footage and having 2 Navy guys or pilots saying we have no idea either. We're looking at the same screen you are, and we don't know what it is.
Yeah.
So throughout your career of investigating, what are some of the things that you've heard over time that really kind of confirm that something actually happened? It was more than just a blinking light in the sky, or it could have been a drone or a helicopter. These people say they actually had contact, like physical contact with either a alien being or maybe the craft or something.
There's a few abduction cases on the books that are really thought-provoking. They have some level of physical evidence to them. And as time goes on and you examine their testimony, there's been no sign of a hoax, no sign of anybody lying. There's no reason for them to do that. There's been no financial gain. They haven't sold their story for a book or a movie. They've simply kept their testimony pretty low-key, told everybody what they experienced, and then that's it. As opposed to somebody who immediately tries to write a book or make a movie out of it. That's kind of a red flag, can be. It doesn't mean they're hoaxing it, but it's kind of troubling. But there's abduction cases on the book. There's UFO sightings on the books where I can recall there was a sighting in over Lakenheath and Bentwaters Air Force bases in 1956 in Britain, and you had tons of military personnel on the ground, in aircraft, in radar towers at the air bases. These objects were on radar. They were exhibiting flight characteristics we can't reproduce now, over 50 years later.
Right.
Credible witnesses, multiple witnesses. They had no reason to lie. If they were hoaxing this, that would not go well in their military records. That's very thought-provoking. That doesn't get you to the extraterrestrial, but certainly something clearly anomalous took place. There's a few cases like that, and to my mind, I'm thinking, okay, you have these cases that are more nuts and bolts. They see a craft. It's clear that unidentifiable. Great witnesses, good testimony, some physical evidence. There has to be a gap. There has to be a bridge between that and the abduction phenomenon, where individuals are reporting that they have close interaction with an ET, or they're being abducted, or some more personal interaction as opposed to just seeing a UFO from a wide distance. And there may be a connection between those 2 aspects of the UFO issue. You have one that's clearly more reliant on testimony, and one that's more reliant on science. And like I said before, this ability to bridge that gap would really reap a lot of benefits in this field. So, but the number of cases that are really reach out and grab you, there's not many. And I'm not saying there's like 10. There's more than that. But compared to the numbers of cases on the books, there are thousands of cases on the books, thousands, tens of thousands. So the vast majority are mundane and explainable, or have so little data you can't do anything with it. A farmer in South Carolina sees a UFO, reports it, very little testimony or very little idea about what it was. He says it was a red light in the sky, it was a dark night, no photographs, no videos, nothing to do with it. He may have seen an alien spacecraft, but with no data, it's impossible to really grab a hold of it and investigate it.
Right.
So there's very few cases where you can do that, and but they're out there. And like we mentioned before, if you've made up your mind and you're anti-UFO, that means you will be unaware of those strong cases, and that's a shame. That's a true shame. It's a little disturbing to actually think about that.
So I had a couple that I was gonna ask you about, and one of them was Aurora. Have you heard of the Aurora incident? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously, being that's outside of that 1920s, 1930s era.
April 1897.
Yeah. So have you read anything about that? Do you have any feelings on that? Not enough data to correlate with anything?
My gut tells me it's a hoax.
Okay.
So can you explain it to me? What is that? What are you talking about?
The Aurora, Texas crash allegedly happened in Aurora, Texas in April of 1897. I keep 1997. 1897, the previous past century. And the story goes that a craft crashed into a windmill on the land of a gentleman that lived in Aurora, Texas. There was some debris from the craft thrown down a well on that same piece of property. The occupant of the craft, who was deceased, was buried in the local cemetery. Somehow the headstone was moved in 1973 or 74. The body's never been exhumed. And the story was carried in a few newspapers at the time. I've looked into the case for years and years, hoping that maybe there was some snippet of evidence to lead me to the idea that maybe something did happen. But there's been no physical evidence recovered that has been non-terrestrial. They've recovered interesting evidence, but nothing that led you to believe it was from something off Earth. It's been terrestrial stuff. The body's never been exhumed, if it's there. There's a photograph from the early 70s that shows a young man, a resident of the town. I don't know if he's still alive or not, but the headstone was still there on the graveside. That's since been removed. I would think an easy way to prove the case would be just exhume the body. That's for other people to do. But the windmill story it's still a story, but without any really physical proof there. I don't know if it really occurred. Now, there were a couple of historical books written about the history of that county, which came out 30, 40 years later. And there was not one mention of a UFO crash. And I'm thinking, okay, you're writing if we wrote a historical book about the history of Bexar County, if there was a UFO crash in, say, 1970 in Bexar County, there would be an entire chapter dedicated to that event, because that's a little different than just a kid riding his bike down the neighborhood. A UFO crash here, that's pretty important. No mention of it. And the newspaper clippings, newspapers were very unreliable at the time. Yeah, there was a lot of, not propaganda, but there was a lot of stories being pushed that were speculative, that they're trying to sell papers, in other words.
So that was in the 1800s?
1897.
1897.
Yeah.
So were they talking about UFOs back then?
Sure. Well,
would they be writing this?
In looking into that, I found another story from a similar time. I think it might have been a year before, a year after, something like that, of UFO reports moving across Texas, going from the Panhandle down, of people talking to the aliens that were getting out of it, and it was a blimp-shaped craft, and and it's probably a blimp, and it could have passed through that same area. The blimp could have bumped into that. That could have been, there's a lot of speculation in that, but yeah, I mean, there was talk of it, but again, just like I was just gonna say, thank God we're not selling news now. There's a lot of trying to sell stories, and if it was sensationalized, then yeah, absolutely, people would buy the paper. And Aurora was 100,000 people back then, and now it's like 4,000 people. So there was something, there was a lot of people there. You'd think of Aurora as being a small town, which it is now, but then it was a little larger. It was not a rail hub, but the railroad went through there. There's a lot of stuff going on. So I also think that that's kind of, probably a sensationalized story. Maybe something happened and somebody said, oh, maybe it's those little green men from Mars or something. Yeah, that kind of stuff was going around, but
that was a whole wave of sightings. 1896, 1897. Yeah, there was a whole wave in California, Utah, Texas, Arizona of Zeppelin blimp-shaped craft being reported, and individuals reporting occupants.
Yeah,
in the craft. And because we're unable to really attack those cases because they're so far in the past, that would lead one to believe, well, we just can't prove them, we can't examine them. They're probably hoaxes. I won't go that far. I think Aurora is a hoax.
Yeah,
but could one of those sightings be potentially truly anomalous? Sure. But there's no way to prove it or disprove it because it's so far back in time. It's 120 years now, something like that. So it's difficult. But that case is still talked about a lot, at least here in Texas it is. They used to have a little UFO festival in that town, as I recall. But it's still a case of note.
Now, there's another one I don't remember the name of, but it was outside of Houston. And I actually went back to try to look it up and couldn't find it. The two ladies. Okay, so you know about the one.
Yeah, that's Cash Landrum in December of 1980.
Yeah.
There's an interesting coincidence. The day of the Cash Landrum sighting, which was late December 1980, was the same day as the Reynolds from Forest sighting in Britain in 1980. So there were two anomalous cases happening at the same time on the other side of the globe. So although Rendlesham was over 2 days, and Cash Landrum was over one, but that was my take on this. That might be a military apparatus because they reported a diamond-shaped craft with a flame exiting the bottom, traveling slowly from west to east, and it was being chaperoned by 20 to 25 Chinook helicopters moving slowly. I can't imagine an alien spacecraft being surrounded by helicopters and being basically paraded off into the distance. It leads me to believe there might have been a military apparatus. Of course, I could be wrong. I'm very comfortable saying that. But again, multiple witnesses. You have Betty Cash, Vicky Landrum, and Colby Landrum, her grandson. And the two ladies have since passed away. Colby's still around. This happened north of Houston, Texas, which was a little less. The area of the sighting was a little less developed than it is now. And there were also there was a retired law enforcement officer that saw the same thing miles away and described the same kind of craft. So that's a great case because that's 1980.
Yeah.
That's pretty recent.
Yeah.
Documentation, newspapers, they attempted to sue the United States military for damages because these ladies they had burn marks that exhibited the characteristics of radiation burns. That's what the doctors said.
They later had cancer. I think they actually passed away from cancer, both of them.
Yeah, they tried to sue the military because they felt that the military was directly or indirectly responsible for their health issues. Yeah. That case was thrown out of court.
Right.
So, that's a great case.
And I think their standpoint was they went to the Air Force Base shortly after that and were treated. And then shortly after that went back because they had recurring issues and they went, no, that was it. And then they kind of denied that they did that before, but that's, I think that's less government cover up and more of they don't want to be financially responsible for these people's medical problems for the rest of their lives. Yeah. It doesn't take UFOs for the military to deny medical coverage on things they don't want to cover.
Sure. But, interestingly enough, the strip of highway that these ladies and Colby saw the craft on was replaced.
Yeah. Sections of it.
That section was dug out to about, I think, 18 to 24 inches deep and repaved.
And you can see the difference in the pavement now. Yeah. Just because it's still...
Yeah, there were core samples taken by UFO investigators. And the core samples proved that this had been not just repaved, but restructured. It was dug down all the way to the foundations. So that's interesting because that begs the question, why would they do that? Yeah. Great case. Again, 1980, not 1897, but 1980. That's pretty good. That's a good deal.
A lot of good stuff. A lot of good information there.
Yeah. It's you have witnesses who are still around. So that's a very interesting case. There's a lot of cases that are full of information, some of which aren't leading you to the extraterrestrial. Some lead you toward secret military apparatus. Some lead you in a direction that's a little more, to quote my friends, a little more woo factor, like it's high strangeness, as Dr. Hynek used to say. The characteristics being reported in these cases is just pretty bizarre, where science can't explain it. So that's definitely in more of a left field direction, and those are valid cases that can't be explained, just as valid as anything else that has more physical evidence. So. But even in the UFO field, there are researchers that won't look at those things. Even in the UFO field, there are researchers that can be biased. They look at just nuts and bolts cases. They ignore the paranormal ones, or vice versa. And to me, that's troubling because it's still UFO. It's the UFO topic, regardless of how high the level of strangeness is or how low it is. It's still a UFO sighting. It begs to be examined. Just because it isn't in your comfort zone doesn't mean it shouldn't be looked at. And again, the paranormal cases, the ones that are a little more strange, tend to have interactions with individuals, which means you have individuals who are troubled and traumatized by their experience. They deserve some answers, at least that. Common courtesy and some examination of these cases so they know that, okay, I'm not going crazy. I saw something anomalous. These researchers have confirmed I saw something. That can at least allow them to rest and say, they can go home and say, okay, I did see something anomalous. I'm not crazy. I'm not crazy. I saw something strange. And to me, if I saw a UFO and I was troubled by it, I thought I was going bonkers. But then researchers came to my house and looked at the evidence and examined it and came back to me a month later and said, Mr. Pullin, you saw a UFO.
Yeah.
I would feel a lot better.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be so going crazy. I'm like, these guys examined this at face value and didn't think I was crazy. Came back to me with an answer, Mr. Pullin, you saw something anomalous we can't explain. I'd be able to sleep that night.
Right.
Because I would know, okay, I'm not going crazy. I saw something they can't explain. I think that's kind of cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we often want, like, speaking for myself, like I go out like almost every night and look up hoping to see something, especially when I'm walking the dogs and stuff. But you talk about the trauma of experiencing this. I want you to speak a little bit more about that, because I think that I want to see, a craft and for it to land and me to have interaction. But you're right, that could be totally terrifying. Can you speak a little bit more about that?
Well, we're all covered. We're all comfortable in our own lives. Walk the dog, water the yard, mow the grass, go to 7-Eleven, whatever the case may be. Going to work, coming home, wife and 2 kids. So when something anomalous happens that really is out of the ordinary, it can be troubling. But and that's in the realm of like a car crash or someone passed away or something really bizarre happened during their day. But when you talk about seeing a UFO or having an interaction with something that you can't really explain, that would scare me to death. That's completely out of the realm of everyday life. That would be traumatizing. You couldn't explain it. You couldn't wrap your head around it. I saw something that just freaked me out. I'd go home and you'd probably go. I know I would go home and just sit on the couch and try to run it through my head a million times. Like, what the hell was that? What was that? What was that? And I couldn't explain it, and I would tend to write it down, but that wouldn't make it any better. I still wouldn't know what I saw. So individuals are seeing things that traumatize them. They're going through a difficult time with it. It's almost like combat stress. It's very traumatizing. It comes out in a physical way. It comes out mentally. It comes out emotionally. It traumatizes them on every level as a human person. Those are the kind of individuals that can least afford being made fun of, because they're already in a bad place. They're already struggling with this occurrence. So those are the individuals that clearly should be treated with respect, courtesy, and have their cases looked at in a professional, objective manner, saying, hello, Mr. Smith, we know we've been traumatized by this event. We're going to look at all the data and do our very best to examine this case and come back to you with some form of answer. You just sit tight, we'll take care of you.
Yeah.
And he would feel comfortable with that.
Yeah.
As opposed to having people laugh at him, people writing bad blog postings, being made fun of in a magazine. Right. That's the last thing they need. But if you have a professional group coming to them or a professional individual to examine their case, that goes a long way. And there's a lot of that in the UFO field. And not all of those individuals have seen something UFO related. There are a lot of other sources that can traumatize a human being that have nothing to do with UFOs. But regardless of the source, all those individuals need to be treated with respect.
Yeah.
And not ridiculed at all. And if it's something UFO related, that's great. If it isn't, well, then it's some other source. But the individual who's experienced it should be treated with respect at all times. And that does not always happen. Even by UFO researchers, that doesn't always happen. And that's horrible. That needs to change. But,
I've seen and heard some stuff where people are almost led in a direction, like the researcher or the investigator is trying to come to a conclusion and is going to pull the witness along with them until they kind of say what it is. And that goes for anything. It's not just UFO researchers. It goes for a lot of other things too. Yeah. But I've seen some of that and thought, oh, well, you're kind of leading that person down this road. You're trying to get to the bottom of it. Maybe you ought to investigate the evidence a little more and not, because eyewitnesses, it is a traumatic experience, any traumatic experience, and you try to take an eyewitness's account of it, at that moment, there's a lot of stuff going on in their mind. There's a lot of stuff happening, and to try to say, I'm going to extract scientific evidence from somebody's account of the happening I think would be problematic at least, because there's, like you said, if you saw something what's going to be going through your mind. What is this? Where is it from? What's going on here? And you start to question your entire belief structure, your existence. Now, oh my gosh. So are you going to be 100% in the moment? Absolutely not, because you have all this stuff going on in the background. So the physical evidence, I think, is video, interaction with the ground or surrounding trees or whatever. Not to say that you can't listen to what somebody has to say. Absolutely, you can. But I feel like you have to kind of take that with a little bit of grain of salt and say, but at the moment, what was going through your mind? Okay, you're going through this traumatic experience. You're going to have you're not scientifically looking at this. You're looking at this emotionally. Like, oh my gosh, this thing is happening to me.
Yeah. Yeah, that does happen. Yeah. I know a couple of researchers I hold in pretty high regard, and I won't name names, but even they are kind of cautious with just testimony. I find I'm a little troubled by that. I mean, somebody comes with a UFO sighting report, it's just testimony, and they're like, well, there's no physical evidence. I just can't do anything with that. I don't accept that. My thought is, okay, they came with me testimony. Let me attempt to find physical evidence. Clearly they experienced something. Now, I'm also cautious and realize that, I can think of 3 UFO cases that came to my desk that were testimony driven, and they lied. They just lied. Not everybody tells the truth. These are human beings. But the vast majority of experiencers are telling what actually happened to them. They're not lying. They're telling you what happened, and they're being 100% truthful. I don't know why anybody would cast those cases aside. The idea is to investigate the case and try to find more data. And if you have a case that's nothing but physical evidence, well, then you need to find some testimony. Vice versa works. If it's just nothing but testimony, you need to find physical evidence because you need to find multiple chains to get you to an answer. But just to cast it aside because it's someone's story doesn't apply with me either. We need to be better than that. Yeah.
Did you? How about those cases? And these are few and far between, but that they have physical evidence and such, like DNA. So there's this one guy said that he woke up and there was a Nordic female in his bed, and there was a hair, and this hair has gone to all these different labs to do DNA testing. Have you heard about that?
I've heard claims of that. I've not been able to confirm any of them.
Yeah.
My first thought is, okay, what are the labs that it's being sent to?
Yeah.
I need to see physical reports that have been written up as to the results of their scientific investigations. I've yet to find that. That's not to say he's lying. That's not to say it didn't happen. But as an investigator, I want to know those things. I want to see, okay, being a science guy, if an alien interacted with you and you got a piece of a hair or a piece of organic material and you had it examined by scientific labs, I want to see that report. I want to dig that up. I want to look at that and memorize it. That's fascinating. A piece of organic material from an extraterrestrial being, and they examined it scientifically. That's fascinating. I'm not looking at it from a debunker or a skeptic standpoint. I'm looking at it as a human being who likes to examine the UFO issue. That's a fascinating read. I want to see that. But the claims are out there that there's been interactions with extraterrestrials. There's been the abduction phenomenon. There's been claims of implants put in the body after abductions. The thought being that aliens are trying to track us, for whatever reason.
They could just get with Verizon and figure out.
Yeah, probably could. Yeah. So there's a lot out there. That kind of goes to the high strangeness part of the UFO issue. It's out there. It's unexplained. Am I able to give you a definitive answer? No, I have no idea. But people are seeing things and they're reporting pretty bizarre occurrences. And that, to me, that's fascinating. I want to look. I want to learn more. So
That's what's so bizarre about this, though, is even if you have physical evidence, like you said, I want to know what lab they're sending it to, because who is trained to check extraterrestrial hair,
right,
to see if it's legit, right? You got this in like carbon dating with rocks and stuff. You send it to 12 different labs, and they date it differently, right? So if this hair exists, if you send it to 3 or 4 different labs, I wonder what the different results are.
It's definitely not human. Well, no, it turned out to be a yak hair.
Well, they say that
it wasn't human, though. Yeah, so
the DNA is closer to like chimpanzee or some kind of missing link,
right,
in between human and chimpanzee, I guess they were saying.
So you have, with all your investigations and you working through this, the time that you have, you believe that UFOs exist, at least,
Yeah.
a section of these are real, actual occurrences, interactions with unidentified flying objects. Everybody says UFO and they automatically think aliens. Do you believe it's aliens, or there's theories out there saying that they could be time travelers? It's us from the future coming back. I've heard all sorts of different theories out there. Is there a certain one that you go with, or you think that it is just taking it at face value, unidentified flying objects?
Going back to your point about the acronym, UFO is always equated to alien spacecraft.
Right.
They're not the same thing.
Right.
If it's a UFO is unidentified, if you knew what it was, it would cease to be unidentified.
Right.
A UFO is something unidentified in the sky flying. That's it.
Right.
Could be a bird, could be a alien spacecraft, could be a leaf.
Right.
My professional position has always been that 90 to 95% of these things are explainable, that are mundane. Of that 5 to 10%, a percentage of those could be alien spacecraft. I think alien visitation has occurred. It's nowhere near as common as what's portrayed in the UFO community, but I think it has occurred. Having said that, it's not a common occurrence. Mm-hmm. And what may end up being the explanation, I think a lot of the cases strongly suggest the extraterrestrial theory, meaning that they're actual physical craft being flown here by occupants or their creations to visit planet Earth for whatever reason. Maybe they discovered this accidentally. There are cases that strongly suggest otherwise, but it's difficult to explain those cases. It's difficult to pin down, is that multidimensional? Is that time travelers? What scenario would that cover? I don't know, because those are dynamics we can't explain. We can't explain how to travel in time or how to travel to another dimension. We don't know how to do those things. We do know how to get to another star. We just can't do it, but we know how it would get done. So we can kind of wrap our head a little better around those cases. So there's cases that strongly suggest that, like Roswell, like Lake and Heath Bentwaters, like Socorro, New Mexico in '64. They strongly suggest extraterrestrial. It doesn't get you there because we don't have a piece of the craft or an organic body. Mm-hmm. But I think that explains some of them. But I don't think there's one theory that explains all of them. Because you have, again, the high strangeness / paranormal cases that are beyond science's ability to explain, which clearly suggests something else is going on. Still something non-terrestrial, which by definition is alien. But as to the cause of it, I don't know because we're limited by our knowledge now. We can't explain something because it's beyond our abilities. So it's a multifaceted problem is what it is. So.
Yeah. So do you think what is your feeling? And I know that the show Ancient Aliens, I think, is funny.
True.
And because a lot of it seems to come always down to we can't explain this one thing. We can't recreate a pyramid from Egypt, so it must be aliens because there's just no other way around it. And I think that's a very easy way to come to a conclusion on something. If you can't explain it, if you went back to the 1700s, that would be called magic. So anything that can't be explained must be aliens. But what do you think that aliens have had any? We've agreed that phenomenon has been going on since we have existed. There's been some sort of cave paintings all the way to Leonardo da Vinci. So do you feel like if they exist now, they existed then? Was there any interaction? Do you think that would be something that is viable?
I think there's a potential that there may have been some interaction, but now it may not have been direct. They may have seen something in the sky that it could explain and assigned it to the gods. Because that's the way it kind of worked back thousands of years ago. Individuals saw things in the sky they couldn't explain. It was the gods. The gods are angry. The gods need to be appeased or whatever, because they didn't have the scientific knowledge to assign a definition to that, or they didn't have the societal knowledge to be able to assign a definition to it, whether it's scientific or not. But I think it is very easy to say, okay, we can't explain it, therefore alien.
Right.
No, human history has shown that as groups of people invade other people's lands, they tend to destroy that group's history.
Right.
So how much knowledge has been destroyed by our own hand?
Right.
We burnt down the Library of Alexandria. I mean, come on. By our own hand, we've created this problem of not having enough answers of our own history. So who built the pyramids? Who built Machu Picchu? Who constructed these megalithic structures? May have been humans.
Yeah.
But we've lost the knowledge to definitively say that. Right. So I think they may have seen extraterrestrial craft in the skies like we see now. It's a potential. And it may have influenced them to draw things on their walls, cave paintings, that sort of thing, because they drew what they saw, whether it was a woolly mammoth, a dire wolf, or a UFO. Having said that, did they heavily influence our society? I don't know. I think that's not giving humans enough credit. That's the issue I have when I watch Ancient Aliens, which I don't very often.
Right.
But when I do, I keep thinking, okay, aren't you selling us short? We did go to the moon.
Right.
We can accomplish wonderful things.
Right.
We can do horrible things to each other as a species. World War II, World War I, Vietnam, the list goes on and on. But we've accomplished some wonderful things as a species. It's kind of selling us short thinking that we couldn't have built these things. Well, we might have. We just, through our own hand, destroyed the knowledge of them being built. So I'm kind of cautious with that. But even Carl Sagan thought he felt we were visited about every 100,000 years. Random chance dictated aliens are flying by in space. They might randomly come across Earth and take a look and then take off.
So that begs the question, right? Because all these reports and all these researchers traveling the world trying to figure this out, why aren't they making themselves known? If we're heading to Mars, once we get there, if there's life there, we're not going to turn around and come back. We're going to land and try to interact with those species or whatever, unless we think they're totally dangerous. Like if we notice that they're highly advanced and they're weaponized and all this stuff, we might try to figure out a way not to interact with them. But if every 100,000 years or so we do get a flyby and they look down at us, why haven't one of them just landed and say, hey, a whole planet of people, cool. We thought we were the only ones.
Yeah, I think part of that would be, let's assume, and I hate to assume, but let's assume they are physical craft piloted by another species coming from another star system. By definition, that means they're far more advanced than we are, at least technologically. That does not mean they're more advanced as a species, but their technology is. Because, we're a perfect example. Our technology is advancing. But as people, as humans, we kind of do the same things we've been doing for about 4,000 years. We're still engaging in warfare. There's still racism. There's still these horrible thought processes that our technology has not changed. I think my gut feeling has always been that they discovered this accidentally. They may have been just exploring the universe like an advanced species may be doing. They came across a planet with a sentient landform that was having some rudimentary beginnings of a civilization. They just came across us. Why haven't they landed here? I think because of who we are. Humans tend to shoot first. I think that opening sequence of The Day the Earth Stood Still, where the saucer lands in Washington, D.C., what do humans do? They surround it with tanks and soldiers. When that craft has done nothing to deserve that, there's been no provocation going on. It just landed. That's how human beings tend to conduct themselves. So as an advanced species, I certainly want to, if we found life on, say, Proxima Centauri, and it was advanced, say, to about 1850 AD by our standard, I really wouldn't want to land on the White House lawn. They'd probably come out with a bunch of muskets and shoot us. Yeah, it would be better to just observe us from afar, and just say, okay, what are they doing? What technology are they developing? What's going on? How is this species evolving and developing as a species, and going from there? So, but I'm cautious with that because that's applying human thought processes to an alien species, and by definition, they're alien. So we have no idea how they think. Do they have morals? Do they have religion? How is their thought process? What is their social structure like? We have no idea. So they may be ant-like, they may be warlike, they may be like us, they may be nothing like anything on this planet. Going back to the comment you made about the individual who found the piece of hair that had alien DNA, do they have DNA? There was life on Earth billions of years ago that didn't have DNA. Everything was based on RNA. That changed about 4.5 billion years ago. So on another planet where evolution takes place, it may be a different life process. They may not have DNA, or something that we just can't visualize right now until we saw it. If we gained organic material of something extraterrestrial, my gut tells me it would be unlike anything on Earth. It wouldn't be even close to DNA. Maybe something just totally alien, like what's going on, like to the point where we wouldn't be able to even wrap our head around, okay, why is this alive? By the thought process, by the knowledge we have, this thing should not be alive, and yet it's living. It's evolved under a completely different set of circumstances than we did on Earth, but maybe they just haven't felt right about landing here yet. I mean, there's been some cases where there's been landings, but there's been no landing at the White House lawn. There's been no landing in Moscow at Red Square. There's been no introduction as to, I'm their leader, we're from yada, yada, yada. We'd like to interact with you as a species. We're from here where you come in peace. There hasn't been that yet.
Of course, just like what you're talking about, though, if I was somebody coming here and I was going to land here, the White House would be the last place I would land.
Yeah.
For that exact reason. I might land out in the middle of the woods somewhere just to take a look around and not necessarily jump in and interact, because there is a pandemonium. That's I don't remember who said it, but they say one person is smart, 2 people are intelligent, 3 people start to lose. It's like the IQ starts to go down. You get 100 people and somebody yells fire and people get trampled over to death.
Yes.
So there's a sort of herd mentality that, if one person can handle being interacted with, 2 people, maybe 100 people, no, that's bad. Then things start to get crazy and everybody freaks out, so I feel like that might be something to do with it. Yeah. I mean, there's no telling. And that's the whole thing, is if it could be a combination of all those things. The universe is so huge.
Yeah.
You could have aliens just like us, and you could have ones that were nothing like us whatsoever, silicone based. I mean, there's just such a variety. Maybe every what was the time frame? Every so many years,
every 100,000 years.
Every 100,000 years, it's somebody different that goes, oh look, there's this little place over here. Somebody completely different comes to say hi.
And going to your point about the experiencer scenario, the more paranormal cases, those seem to lead to or suggest a personal interaction with an ET. So those individuals have more of a perspective as to who they are, as opposed to someone seeing an unassembled craft. We're seeing their technology, but not them. An experiencer interacts with them, which is a totally different dynamic. I mean, if you look at an alien landing here on Earth, if they come across a computer or a 747 or a Volkswagen Bug, they're seeing our technology, but not us.
Yeah.
They're learning about us through our technology, but you learn more about a species through that species, the actual member of that species. So an experiencer interaction speaks more volumes about the phenomenon, because at some point, if we prove these are alien spacecraft, at some point we want to know who's piloting those craft. And experiencers have a leg up on us because they've interacted with an alien individual. That's a potential there. So,
have you ever spoke to anybody that said they were an experiencer like that, or read any cases that stand out to you about interacting with the actual entity or the being or something?
I've interviewed a few of them. One of which is a close friend, or has become a friend since then. Some of the things that they comment on and describe are similar to other cases, where there seems to be somewhat of an emotional detachment. They're not cold; they're just kind of clinical, where they're examining you, they're observing you, they're taking measurements, they're looking at your body, they're measuring your reactions. But they're not attached to you. They're not warm. They're not like a doctor patting you on the shoulder saying, "Don't worry, this procedure won't hurt. You're gonna be okay." No, they just do it.
All business.
Yeah, which may be just like you said, it's all business. It may not speak much for them as the species. They may be a warm, affectionate species, but when it comes to them trying to assimilate us or to learn more about us as a species, they're just going about their business, perhaps. So that lack of emotion is a common trait. There's a whole list of different aliens that have been described in different ways.
Did your friend mention telepathy?
Yeah, several of them have. That communication is on a nonverbal level. And it doesn't seem to be a communication that's really forced on you. It's almost like it's almost like they're just there, and then the suggestion of a voice is in their head. It's someone else's voice. It's always in English. which is interesting to me. That needs to be answered too. But it seems like it's always nonverbal. I've never read a alien abduction or an interaction case where communication was verbal. Never. It's always been either some level of body language or nonverbal, which is interesting. Because it makes you wonder, okay, as the species evolve, do they evolve beyond the need for speech? If their mental faculties increase in complexity, does their ability to communicate transcend speech and go into the nonverbal? That may happen. That may be, it may not, but that's certainly what's being reported. So
seems to be the trend that we're on. When you think about texting or whatever, it's nonverbal. That's our only way to do that so far. But that seems to be a push. You could call somebody, or you could send them a text. You prefer to do the nonverbal.
And our bodies as humans are becoming less and less physical because we're becoming more and more reliant on our technology. And most of the aliens that are being reported are not physically strong. They don't look physically. They're not imposing. They're not threatening because they tend to be slimmer, thinner. They don't look very muscular, which lends one to believe that maybe their technology has affected their physical bodies like it's affecting ours, except they're further thousands of years down the road. I mean, if we assume their technology is further along than us, and they're older than us, then what's happening to us has happened to them, possibly.
That might be where the futurist sort of theories come from, where we're not meeting aliens, we're meeting us in the future, because that seems to be our natural progression towards that,
Yeah, that's a possibility. That is a theory that's thrown out there. Yeah, they are us in the future coming back to visit their ancestors. That's a possibility. I mean, they're in humanoid form,
right?
2 arms, 2 legs, 2 ears, 2 eyes, a mouth. That's interesting because, like you said, the universe is so vast. Are intelligent species always in humanoid form? I would think not. No, but these seem to be, which is interesting.
Of course, as well, if they're using telepathy, they could be projecting themselves as something we would recognize,
That's true.
Something that we would feel more comfortable with. Maybe not another human, because that would almost seem upsetting. But if it was something that we would recognize as another being, maybe there's some comfort involved in that, But so I was gonna ask if there was, because I'm not aware of really much going on in the San Antonio area. If there's a specific case in San Antonio that's the most interesting to you, that you would like to talk about.
Oh gosh, there was I'm going to go back in time here. Not in 1897. Though.
All right, we're going back in time
to the good old days of the 70s. There were a couple of multiple witness military personnel, or involved military personnel. A couple of cases, sightings over Kiley Air Force Base. I think it was in April or May of 1976. Again, this object was tracked on radar. You had over 10 military personnel, some in the tower, some on the ground. Train observers, some were pilots on the ground. They weren't in their aircraft, but they were watching this thing in the sky. So it was a radar visual. They had it on radar, and it was visually within range. To me, that's one of the stronger cases in this area because, again, you have instrumentality, multiple witnesses, not just testimony, not just physical evidence, some conglomeration of both. Those come to mind immediately. Beyond that, in San Antonio, no, the closest case I can think that really is strong is Cash Landrum over in Houston. So, and you could extend this to all of UFO investigations. It's difficult to really perceive or draw any conclusions from the data because the data may be incomplete. Most sightings are not reported, whether they're experiencer sightings of that realm or just nuts and bolts UFO cases. Most are not reported. So whatever patterns you derive from the data you have may be skewed because you're looking at an incomplete set of data. That's very troubling. And then most cases are reported after the fact. It's very difficult to reach any conclusions about it. Yeah, the best I will occasionally will say the data strongly suggests that. That's about as far as I'll go. But that says a lot. When you can eliminate all these other explanations, and if the data strongly suggests extraterrestrial, okay, that speaks volumes.
Right.
Mm-hmm. It does.
So can you think of any reason why this subject in particular has caught your attention as something that you wanted to pursue in your life? Where it could have been, murders that happen in history, it could have been a lot of things, but for UFOs to stick with you.
Yeah, I watched a lot of sci-fi in the 70s when I was going to grade school and high school. But I was fascinated with dinosaurs. I thought I was going to be a paleontologist. And then come high school, I discovered math and science and just fell in love with that. I love science. So by the time I got to my college years, I finished my degree in engineering, but I never used it. I work as a tennis professional. The UFO issue just kind of grabbed me because you have an opportunity for science. You have an opportunity for using the scientific method to investigate these things on a nuts and bolts level, but you have parts of these cases that are clearly more of a high strangeness. They're kind of bizarre, that it makes you think, okay, what's really going on here? What's really going on here? And I've always had my mind has always been open enough that to think, okay, I don't know all the answers. I'm just a regular humanoid on a small blue planet. How can I possibly have all the answers? I don't. So what's being reported that's kind of bizarre and out there, I find that fascinating. Because if this is something that's actually off Earth, that's alien, that's a huge deal. That would be the most momentous discovery in the history of this planet. There's been some amazing things that have been done on the planet Earth, but to discover that we're not alone, there's other intelligent individuals and groups and species out there that didn't evolve here, that's a huge deal. So on that alone, it's fascinating. Although I do recall in college, one of the first ideas that really got me into the UFO issue was I was wondering why the government and the military was spending so much taxpayer dollars investigating something they say doesn't exist. I'm like, wait a minute, I go to work and pay the bills and pay property taxes and try to pay my house off, and yet Uncle Sam is taking money out of my wallet to investigate something he says doesn't exist. Okay, why? I want to know. From a taxpayer standpoint, back then, I thought everybody should want to know. The bills don't pay themselves. So the idea that the government is using money to examine UFOs is interesting by itself too, regardless of the data. Yes, the government has wasted taxpayer dollars at different times in the history of this country, but have they consistently spent billions of dollars, not just the government, but the military, on one single topic over several decades? I can't think of one that's been hidden from the public and ridiculed at the same time. I can't think of one. It's very interesting. And then for the another angle that I took was military personnel have been clearly, until recently, clearly in a roundabout way or directly, basically told not to talk about the UFO sightings. They're told not to talk about it. It can negatively influence their career. And my first thought was, why? The UFO issue, it doesn't exist. That's what you said. And yet you were telling your pilots not to report something that didn't exist. That makes no sense. What's going on here? And that alone needs to be looked at. Yeah. So it's.
Well, this may or may not actually get put in the podcast, but I will ask if you're obviously you're familiar with Dr. Greer.
Yes.
And all of his research and all that kind of stuff. And their standpoint is not only do UFOs exist, not only is there a government cover-up involved, but there's actually interaction between the two. There's trading of information. There's recovered craft. There's all of this. Do you think that is a true statement, or is that a lot of, because there's a lot of that money and a lot of that stuff goes into black projects that are to give bad information, to actually create a false positive, to show, something that may not necessarily be. And that exists not only in UFOs, but it exists in politics. It exists in military operations around the world. There's two sides. There's what's actually happening and what's being, projected as what's actually happening there. There's, the military works that way, not just in UFOs.
There's been a government push toward a cover up, or at least to lessen the importance of the UFO issue since the 50s. Part of that was motivated by the Cold War. The Cold War is done, but it's still being maintained on some level. Maybe not a direct cover up, but at least a roundabout way to lessen the importance of the UFO issue to the general public. So that's been going on. That's established. Is there interaction with UFO with let's say UFO occupants? I don't know. There's been claims of that. I've been unable to find documentation or any kind of physical evidence that would strongly corroborate that or confirm that. I don't know. there's been this idea that we've interacted with them to gain some level of technology, recovered craft. I think there has been UFO evidence recovered. I think of Roswell. I think of a few other cases where physical evidence, meaning a craft or possible physical bodies, were recovered. My take is they're all at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. I don't think there's anything at Area 51. Area 51 I think is a. I'm going off a tangent here. Area 51 is a secret military base. It's not a secret now, but it's a military base where we test and develop secret aircraft. Now, could some of those aircraft have been inspired by recovered alien technology? That's a possibility. But I just don't think we as a species are smart enough to reverse engineer an alien spacecraft. No, it'd be like taking a VHS back to Leonardo da Vinci and saying, okay, figure this out. He would have to define two things that are invisible: electricity and magnetism.
Right.
He wouldn't have the intelligence.
Right.
Brilliant man just couldn't do it. So if an alien spacecraft crashed at Roswell, which I think it did, were we smart enough then or now to reverse engineer it? No, but I think on a visual level, we might get some ideas about how to construct something that's more aerodynamic, ideas about materials. That's logical. But to reverse engineer the entire craft, I think it's beyond us. As far as interactions with ETs that have been there's an idea that there's a story out there that President Eisenhower signed a treaty with an extraterrestrial in California in the 50s to establish some sort of interaction with aliens. I don't know if that happened. My gut tells me that did not happen. But again, I could be wrong. So, but having said that, there's a lot of claims out there in the UFO field that may be reality, but they're very difficult to prove. They're impossible to disprove too. So it's you kind of just take it with a grain of salt and say, okay, this may be true. We just need to be cautious and see how time goes along, and maybe it might come to fruition. So
I think anything's possible. I think with my experience in the military, that would be highly improbable, because there's always people that come out and will say something about it. I know there's people that have come out and said something about that, but usually those people have to go live in Russia because they can no longer live here. They're being persecuted, that sort of thing. So to have as many people as you would have to have on a project like that stretched over the time, I think would be highly unlikely to be able to keep that quiet. The F-117 was kept quiet for 20 years. 20 years and 80 years, 100 years is a lot different. I think it'd be difficult. I think it'd be extraordinarily difficult to do. Possible? Sure. Anything's possible. Area 51 is where the F-117 was developed. That's where they flew out of. Same thing with the B-1 or the Flying Wing, B-2, whatever that was.
The SR-71, the U-2, yeah, all those. Yeah.
They're all flew out of Area 51.
Yeah.
And, that's a top secret base for Skunk Works projects, not necessarily, UFOs. They all look, they were UFOs. Nobody knew what the F-117A was until they came out and said what it was. So to say it was a UFO, it was by the term UFO. Nobody knew what it was. They didn't know what to identify it as. There's pictures of it flying around. They're like, here's the UFOs, It's stealth fighter.
Yeah, you're right. And then, that story, that's another story that's been out in the UFO field. The Area 51 is aliens there. There's craft there.
Yeah.
I possibly. I just don't think so. I think it's the right path, and things we might have been inspired, and that's the spot where we develop technology or our own making, which may or may not in a direct way been inspired by something we recovered back in the 40s or 50s or what have you. So, but anything's possible. It's and the other thing that happens is the military tends to compartmentalize everything. So one individual, one room wouldn't know what the next person down the hallway is working. So you prevent someone from knowing everything. But that still means that somebody would at some point have whistleblown and said, well, I was working on this in my area. And someone else might come through in a couple of decades and go from there. But I still don't know if we could actually do that physically, because we can barely get to the moon. So if something came from 20 light years away, will we even recognize an engine? I don't know. I
like your analogy with the VHS tape and Da Vinci. Yeah. I mean, that's pretty good, because you're right. He wouldn't have the. It's made out of plastic. What the heck is this? And then you're right. Electricity, magnetism. It just would be that would be
is a brilliant man. He just doesn't have the societal knowledge to do that. So
nothing to base that.
I think it was the author. I might be misquoting him, but I think the author Isaiah Asimov said that extraterrestrial technology would look like magic to us.
Yeah.
The way our technology looks like magic to, say, a tribe in Indonesia now. So, which is not to say it has not happened. Maybe we accidentally figured it out. That's a possibility. But if we keep ourselves grounded, okay, that most likely it probably didn't happen. It may have influenced us, but that's about as far as it would go. So, and by the time we get smart enough to reverse engineer it, our technology by itself would be pretty advanced. So we would need to.
Yeah.
I think that speaks to your point, back to the question I asked, why don't they visit us, right? So, like you said, we're projecting our morals and the way we think about stuff on extraterrestrials, right? We think we're really interesting. Like, why would they fly by and not stop? Like, we're pretty cool, you know what I mean?
Right.
But thinking about that, with what y'all both just said, it's like if I was flying my jet over some part of Africa and there was a little village down there, I'm not going to go, oh, hell, let's stop there and check it out. They might fly by and we're just not that interesting for a stopover. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They may look some primitive civilization doing their thing, not that important. Let's just keep on going.
Yeah.
And that may speak to the testimony of experiencers, people that have witnessed UFO interactions or abductions or whatever the case may be, the high strangeness cases. They may be traumatized because these are so out of the ordinary experiences. If we landed a Huey helicopter in the middle of the Amazon and conducted a bunch of experiments on natives there, that would blow their mind. They would think the gods came down and visited them. Or they would have, these people have magic there. They have white skin and blue eyes and blonde hair. Who are these gods from the sky? So an alien, if an individual is having interactions with an extraterrestrial, it may be such a traumatic experience because it's so out of the ordinary. It's so non-terrestrial. It's from a point of view that we don't have because it's an alien point of view.
Well,
it may be just very troubling on that point alone. So
yeah, the fact that when they're carrying out those medical, procedures or whatever, that would be like us doing that to a cow or a dog or a sheep. We kind of have compassion for it, but do we really empathize with it? We're giving it a shot. We're clipping its toenails. We're doing whatever, and then go get the next one. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I agree.
So.
Yeah. Seems to be the case, And in the history of the UFO phenomenon, the abduction accounts didn't really come up until the 60s. You had historical accounts back thousands of years, paintings and that, and then you had Aurora and the Foo Fighters in the World War II, and some of the nuts and bolts craft, the ghost rockets, Roswell happened, and then the first abductions started happening in the 60s. It was almost like they were examining our society, our technology. And then by the 60s, they were examining us. The next step took place, which makes sense. If we arrived at an alien planet, say technology was 1910, we would probably stay in orbit and observe them from afar. Their technology, what can they do, what they can't do, what's their weapon, really, what's their transportation, what's their communication grid like. Examine their technology, their society, how they interact with each other. And then the next logical step would be examine them, their physical attributes. So maybe that transpired. But even this whole statement I just made may be illogical because I'm projecting human motivations on an alien species. They may conduct themselves a completely different way. So
right.
It's fascinating to talk about. We can go on for hours about it and not be any closer to any answers, which is a lot
Welcome
of fun.
to our podcast.
There we go.
Yeah, we have a joke. We can solve the world's problems in less than 45 minutes. So.
That usually happens until UFOs. We need about 3 hours, so then we'll have all the answers. So yeah. So Roar was a hoax. Roswell was ET. Cash Landrum was military. We got to examine. We got to go over Kecksburg and all these other cases. So we'll figure it all out. Put it in a monogram, and we're good.
There you go.
So, yeah.
What were you saying about the ghost rockets?
Oh, that was a series of sightings right after World War II ended. There were sightings in the Scandinavian countries, 1946, the year after Roswell. And the thought initially was that these were recovered V-2 rockets by the Soviets. They were launching them over Scandinavia to intimidate the Nordic countries, as if the Nordic countries are military powers.
Yeah.
So that series of sightings went on for several months.
Where people would see rockets flying over, but hear no boom.
Yeah, no boom. Yeah, just no. It was silent. There was one that supposedly crashed into a lake, which wasn't recovered. There's a few photographs, and they looked like rockets, but nothing really came of the sightings. Although there was an effort by, I forgot which country it was. The government pretty much put their foot down and mandated that none of the sightings would be printed in newspapers anymore.
Yeah.
So there was an effort to again tamp down the importance. So that was prior. That was between the Foo Fighters and the year before Roswell. So it's kind of a little niche sightings there. So
Okay, so I used to live in Runge, Texas, which is about 35 miles south of here towards Victoria, right? And so my brother took me to this rodeo in a neighboring town. So we're sitting on the tailgate watching these guys rope steers and ride bulls and all this stuff. Well, after it was over with, the rodeo clown walked by, and I said, "Hey, man, good job," or whatever. So he sat down on my brother's tailgate, and him and my brother were drinking beer. They were older than me. I was probably like 13. Well, next thing you know, we're bullshitting for so long, all the cars leave, and they turn out the arena lights. So we're sitting out there in the dark, and we're still sitting on the tailgate bullshitting. Him and my brother are hitting it off, and they're about 5 or 6 years older than me. And so I'm just sitting there, and then suddenly the ground lit up around me. And I looked up in the sky, and it wasn't very high, but it was high enough where it was a huge fireball. And it was falling like slow motion. Like literally, if something was falling super fast and then you physically slowed the video down, it was almost falling too slowly. And it was just a huge fireball. So we start seeing these trucks pull in, and this guy gets out, and he's volunteer fire department, and his radio is going crazy. And so he's like, "Hey, man, y'all see that?" And we're like, "Yeah, we see it." So he's like, "Yeah, blah, blah." And he says, "They said that it's a weather balloon." And I said, "Okay." And so they get in their trucks, and you could tell they're volunteer fire department guys. And so they take off, and we watch it for hours, and it's just falling ever so slowly. Hours and hours of it falling. And then it disappears. So fast forward, I'm in my late 20s, and I go to this rodeo, and I run into that rodeo clown. And I say, "Hey, man," and his name was Brian Henry. I said, "Hey, Brian, I don't know if you remember, but when I was 13, we were at this rodeo in Kennedy, and we saw that fireball." And he goes, "I don't know what you're talking about." I said, "That fireball that was falling." He said, "Man, I don't remember that." And I said, "Are you kidding me? Yeah, okay, well, anyway, so then I went back home to my hometown, and I told my brother, I said, "You'll never believe who I ran into. I ran into Brian Henry." And I was asking him about that fireball incident in Kennedy, and he said he didn't remember it. And my brother goes, "What fireball incident?" I said, "The fireball that was falling through the sky." He goes, "I don't remember that." So I don't know if it was just not important to them or it wasn't memorable. Maybe it was more because of my personality or whatever. It was just more memorable. But regardless of their memory, the thing that was falling from the sky, I don't know what that was. I have no idea. It wasn't a meteor. It wasn't an air balloon. I don't think it was a craft. I don't know what it was, but it literally was bright enough to light up my surroundings, but yet high enough where it was falling for like several hours.
So when you say it was lighting up your surroundings, you mean just the area around you?
No, I mean just
like everywhere.
Everywhere I
was...
could see.
Oh, okay.
You could see kind of like the flame.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. It wasn't that's not a meteor. Too slow.
Yeah.
Not a weather balloon. Not military apparatus.
Yeah. I've seen the shuttle re-enter over Texas, and it wasn't hours. It was maybe minutes. Maybe.
Yeah.
How high in the sky was this thing?
I have no idea. I really don't.
And pitch black at night, so that's difficult to get any kind of point of view from other information. But
and I've gone back and I've
yeah.
Googled like Kennedy, Texas, Carton City, meteorite, UFO, fire in the sky, and I haven't found anything.
That's interesting because when we met at the Wonderland Festival in August, these two ladies that I've been contacted with, they live in three rivers.
Yeah, that's down that direction.
Yeah. And they chronicled their UFO sightings. It's been going on for about 10 years now. Virtually every night they see globes from afar at about 1,000 feet altitude, exhibiting flight characteristics that are kind of out of this world, and 90-degree angles, turns, high speed, the whole 9 yards. But they all take off and come back in the direction of San Antonio. And they have yet to explain them. And my first thought was, if the flight characteristics aren't too out there, I thought, okay, maybe these are military planes because they're coming from San Antonio and returning in the same direction. But then I watched some of their videos, and what these things are doing are no. Those pilots would be much on the inside of the cockpit. So it may be in a way related to what you saw.
Yeah.
But theirs are at high altitude flying fast. Yours was relatively low. And how much of the sky did this thing take up?
See, like I said, I was 13, right? So I it was way above the tree line, but it wasn't like out in space. It was like close enough where I felt like we were illuminated by it, but it was high enough where it was just falling and falling and falling and falling, you know?
I think the really tricky thing about that is that that's something that would stick with everybody. You know,
Yes.
I mean,
would think.
that's not something that would just, you know, kind of come and go. Like, you remember when so-and-so tripped over the pig, you know, this is a big deal and nobody remembers it. And one of your family members, not even like a, you know, you could say, oh, it's just this random person, you know, I mean, like nobody remembers that. And for hours, that's significant.
Well,
think,
I
you know?
mean, I totally understand that aspect, but at the same time, like you say, you have these extremes in personality. So maybe they thought, oh, it's a weather balloon. Guy at the volunteer fire department said it was a weather balloon. And they're not, you know what I mean?
Could be.
And I, to this day, is like, what the hell was that thing? But
Yeah, and weather balloons aren't self-illuminating. So you're talking maybe, I should do this, but taking this, like maybe the size of a tennis ball at arm's length, something like that?
oh no, much bigger than that.
Oh, that says a lot, yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah,
So they
definitely.
would illuminate the ground, yeah. I don't know. That's kind of, again, like what you mentioned. It's so bizarre that they wouldn't remember it. Really, that's a memorable event, to say the least. But to say even 30 years down the road, sure, I remember that night. Sure, yeah, that bizarre thing we saw in the sky one night. Yeah, that was something you would never forget. That I wouldn't think. I don't know. Very interesting. Is that the only sighting you've experienced?
Yeah.
Just the one? Yeah. Really stuck with you. Yeah. That's fascinating stuff. Yeah. I don't know. That's definitely UFO. I mean, not military, not a weather balloon, not a weather anomaly.
Yeah.
Nothing in nature moves that slowly across the sky, illuminating the ground. When something's fiery and lit up, that tends to mean it's active in nature, like a fireball, like a ball lightning, something. It's a very transient occurrence as opposed to something you see over hours. That by itself is bizarre. It crosses the sky over hours.
Yeah.
I don't know what would fly that slowly with no sound, illuminate the ground at that slowest speed across the sky. I don't know.
Yeah.
No idea.
Like
and
I said,
and when you say UFO, you mean unidentified object. In other words, unidentified aerial phenomena.
Yeah.
Not a extraterrestrial.
No.
Yeah.
Potentially.
But
at this point, we don't know what it is.
Right.
But certainly UFO, yeah. I mean, something that we can't explain.
Yeah.
That's pretty impressive. Yeah, that the slowness of its movement. Sometimes in UFO sightings, what really grabs the witness is how it's flying. It's making these maneuvers at high speeds. And that's very thought-provoking. That's impressive.
Yeah.
But lack of speed can be too. Something going across the sky over the course of several hours with that much size. I mean, if it's a star, that's fine. But we know a star. It's very far off in the distance.
Yeah.
Something large in your face that's illuminating the ground, which is clearly in our own atmosphere, not very high in the sky.
Yeah.
Going across over the course of several hours. Yeah, that's
So it
pretty
looked
bizarre.
like, from my vantage point, I could cover it up, try to cover it up with my thumb. It would have been still around the outside.
Yeah.
I'm thinking like a huge beach ball or something like that.
Yeah.
And on fire. And the main part of it, I think, is why it's so memorable to me, is it was moving so slow that almost its slowness defied reality. Sometimes we think about things moving so fast are doing things that normal crafts can't do, but this was actually defying physics by how slow it was falling.
Yeah.
It was bizarre.
Yeah.
It was bizarre.
That's fascinating. Yeah.
I wish I'd had some sort of experience like that. Every time I
That's
seem
two
to
of
have
us.
an experience, like that. The time that we saw the shuttle re-enter, we were on top of an airplane in Fort Worth, and we were working. I used to work nights, and we're working on this jet, and we see this fiery kind of ball, but it was moving pretty quickly. But it's leaving like a white trail behind it, and then we were like, "What is that?" So we called the tower, and they said we were crazy, and we're like, "Okay," but we're sitting here watching it. You could see, and the next day we found out that the shuttle had re-entered, and it had flown right over. Of course, we found out later because the shuttle that fell apart, burned up, was up right over Texas. They actually used our hangar for some of the debris, but that was moving. That's what I'm saying, though. That was moving, relatively quickly, and it definitely didn't light up the ground, and it was, as soon as I read it, I was like, oh, that's what it was. Yeah, that makes sense, but what you're describing is not.
Yeah, and such close proximity.
Yeah.
I mean, you see things from afar. It's kind of bizarre, but yours is relatively close.
Yeah.
Low altitude and slow. That's pretty bizarre. Yeah, that's,
Well, if you want to research it, look, it was during the 80s in Kennedy, Karn City area.
I'll reach out to you, get some more details about the year and
Okay.
everything. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, because again, you had the volunteer fire department. See, but did they vocalize it was a weather balloon?
Yeah.
The other guys.
Yeah. In fact, the guy that pulled up was my cousin, Danny Denson, and I've never asked him about it, but he had a walkie-talkie, and it was like all this chatter, and he was talking to them, and they said it was a weather balloon, and he jumped in his truck and took off. So bizarre.
The fact that there was that much chatter and activity says a lot about, if it's something identifiable, not everybody's going on their radio going crazy. It's a weather balloon, whatever, no big deal. If there's something truly newsworthy, then everybody's on their radio yakking about it. So,
Yeah, everybody wants to see it.
Sure.
They're like, "You seen this before?" I don't know. Let me go look.
Well, he was talking to sheriff's department and police officers and other first
Yeah.
responders and stuff. So
Sure, everybody
on
wants to
his
see it.
radio. Well, we're nearing the end. Do you have any burning desire to say something that we might not have asked you, or?
No, I would just recommend to everybody that if you've had a UFO sighting, report it as soon as possible. There are groups and individuals that will investigate these things. If you see something anomalous, take down notes as soon as possible. Human memory is not exact. So take down details as soon as you can, report it as soon as you can, take any videos, photographs of what you can, and if there's anybody with you, take their testimony too, and move forward from there. But report what you've seen. Report it quickly. That does it all right there. I mean, if you report things quickly enough, that is a huge difference as opposed to learning about something that happened in 1990. You can't do anything about it, but yeah. So write down your details and move forward from then. And keep watching the skies. Look up. When you're on your patio or barbecuing or just hanging out in the backyard, look up. Look up. You'll never see a UFO unless you look up and see what's up there. You'll probably see stars and the clouds and birds, and you'll see Mother Nature at work. But every so often, you might be lucky enough to see something you can identify.
Now, would you want somebody to contact you if they do see something?
Of course. I'm at their service.
Do you want to give them any contact information?
You can find me several ways. You can email me at williampullin33@gmail.com.
Can you spell the last name?
Pullin is spelled Pullin. Or you can reach out to me, message me on my Facebook page, which is William Pullin UFO Historian. You can message me there. I return all messages, whether it's email or message or phone. Because again, I just feel everybody deserves to get some follow through on this if they see something anomalous. So, but if you're in the greater San Antonio area and you see something that you can't explain, reach out to me and I'll make an attempt to investigate it and get you some answers. So,
Awesome.
Yeah, but definitely want to thank you for being here. It's been a blast. I appreciate it. I've learned quite a bit. So that's what this is all about.
it's been fun. Yeah.
Thank
it's
you,
been good.
William.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Well, this is the Monk and the Mechanic podcast. This is episode 4.
Episode 4.
My name's Kiley, and I'm the Monk.
I'm Josh, and I'm the mechanic. We'll see you next time.